Good morning, my creative friends. This is Dr. Minette Riordan, and this is Painting in Your PJs with Minette. Today is, what is today? It is December 12th, and I am 4 prompts into creating my end of year reflection journal for 2022, and I'm really loving kind of reflecting back on everything that has happened this year. So you can see process videos on how I made the journal and how I created these pages. In the live section shows all the recordings on my YouTube channel. And I am really all about the intersection of beauty and meaning, and looking at art as process for personal inquiry and healing. And I love supporting others to use art as process, learning about art as we go, but also learning about yourself, your gifts, your talents, as well as your challenges and your sorrows. And when I spent a little time last night thinking about, excuse me, what do I want to create today, around the prompt of what did I learn this year, it was interesting. It was a really interesting moment. And I've already done some journaling this morning before I got on the video. But it was interesting to reflect on, I don't know that I learned anything like super practical, like I didn't go to school or take any big, programs, and I didn't learn a new language or a new skill, but I really spent a lot of time learning and maybe relearning and perfecting some of the skills that I do have. Taking a sip of that nice hot fresh coffee. And one of the lessons that I learned this year was a good one and a painful one. I would say that this year I learned to grieve. Like, I really learned what it meant to hold sorrow in my heart, through some things that happened in our family, through our big move cross country. And I know that moving and changing locations there's always grieving. Even though 100% we moved by choice, there's always sorrow. And out of learning to grieve, I also learned out of grieving, I also learned how to heal my heart. And I've been on a learning journey of healing my heart physically as well, dealing with some genetic high cholesterol that I've never had to deal with before. So health issues. So maybe I've been certainly learning more about my body this year. So I did my journaling, and I'm just painting over that. It's fairly transparent, so you can still see some of that writing through there. I also, maybe one of the most important lessons learned this year was to ask for support, right? To lean on others and to ask for support. So moving is not an easy endeavor, and we had such amazing, abundant support from our beautiful realtor in Santa Barbara and our lovely realtor here in Loveland, from our financial team that helped figure everything out, from all the people that helped us pack and sort and move and repair and update right? Like really learning to lean on support. In the past, we would have probably focused more on, how much of this we can do ourselves, and like that wasn't an option this year for a variety of reasons. We leaned on my parents for support and lived with them for a couple of months while we were house hunting. So I would say asking for support was a big thing I learned this year. I also learned the benefit of my consistent creative practice and how much that supports my heart and every other aspect of my whole self. I also would say, I'm going to set this aside for a second. I would also say that I learned, well, it's a lifelong lesson in learning, but I would say that I learned a little more patience this year. And I'm definitely working on learning, trying to get my gesso open here. I'm also, well, let's see. Tends to dry up under the edges and then it's hard to open. There we go. Learning, relearning, always learning, patience. And to slow down, learning acceptance and compassion for myself. So there have been a lot of big lessons that I've learned. But when I first saw that question, I'm like, I didn't go learn a language, or I didn't learn, woodworking or stained glass, but I spent a lot of time developing, cultivating, and enhancing skills that I already have. So I'm putting some black gesso on this old note card that I have here. And I'll show you what I'm going to do with it in a little while. So I'm going to have some moving parts. I love putting pockets in my journal. So I've got just a plain old, envelope here. A plain old envelope here. And I'm going to have this envelope and this card. So I'm going to build up some different pieces today as we go along in my journal. I'm going to put a little bit of that gesso on this envelope too. And I'm just starting with black because it's what I had in front of me. And sometimes you can create some really cool different effects when you start a piece with black gesso. And because this is about learning, and learning can be challenging, and I feel like I learned some beautiful lessons and some challenging lessons, that black just felt a little bit appropriate this morning. And I also really wanted to honor the presence of grief this year. So we are not a culture that really honors grief or gives people a lot of space and permission to grieve. I don't know that, I would say I knew how to grieve. Let's see. So I have all these parts going on and I don't want to get that black gesso all over my page. But good morning and welcome if you're just joining me. I'm diving right in. This is Painting in Your PJs with Minette. I'm Dr. Minette Riordan. I live in Loveland, Colorado, and I am a creativity and life coach who is passionate about helping others reconnect to their creativity and discover the most authentic expression of themselves, using art as a process, right? So much of what I do is about art as a process. So I'm going to be attaching this envelope to this page. I work very intuitively. I can't even tell you why I chose to paint the background red. I literally looked in my bucket of paints over here, just grabbed a tube of red, and once this is dry, I'm going to stick this envelope down, but I think I'm going to paint the envelope and the card first. So I'm going to be working on those and put this aside to dry over here. And I'm going to kind of work on them both the same. These already have black. I'm okay if that gets all messy on the inside as well. And I'm just trying to think about where do I want to go next. Get those back up under the camera. Get that out of the way. So I love repurposing. So I went through a phase where I was making a ton of handmade note cards. These are little just inexpensive sets of note cards, basically cardstock that you can get, excuse me, at Michael's, and they often have them on sale for great deals, and I have a lot of them lying around, so I love looking for creative ways to use them. And so I thought it would be cool to use one in my journal this morning, and that I might even write a letter to myself on the inside about what I have learned in 2022. Even though I have already done some journaling in my journal, there's something really powerful about writing letters. And this really flows from the prompt around what memories am I taking forward with me? What memories am I taking forward with me? So what did I learn is connected to that prompt that we looked at a couple of days ago. All the prompts are connected and interrelated, as you know. I think they build on each other as we go. I'm just trying to get this lid back on my gesso here, and I'm being pokey with the painting because I'm just waiting for that black gesso to dry a little bit so I don't have to hit it with my dryer. I'm trying to kind of sort of keep my space a little bit neat here. So I've got some crackle paste here, which is something kind of fun to work with. And it was just sitting there beside my gesso, so I'm like, well, what could I do with that crackle paste? So it definitely takes a while to dry, but I think I'm going to come in here and just see what might happen if I just put a little bit of this on my page and create some texture on my page. And this definitely is better if it dries naturally and not with the dryer. So I might have to show you tomorrow what actually happens when I put that on there. It says 3 or more days for curing and cracking on the container. I'm probably not that patient, but I may just let that sit there and see what, if anything, happens. I love using texture paste, and this crackle paste is kind of fun to play with too. Don't know if it'll work in a journal. Usually I use it on a canvas to create some texture and background, but again, I'm just trusting. It was just sort of sitting there and kind of drew my attention, and so it's like, well, why not? Why not? What if I just came and put a little texture in it, and would it crack around the texture? I don't really know. So this is the part about art journaling that I love, is just really being in kind of that space of experimentation. Okay, have no idea what that's going to do, but we're going to set it aside and see. I feel like these are now a little bit dry. I have a little bit more room on my table. I'm going to grab some oil pastels. I'm just feeling sort of curious and playful this morning, and thoughtful about all the things that I've learned, right? All the things that I've learned this year. And you can see it's like I don't really have a plan. I'm not really sure where I'm going. So I'm just doing some of the things that I love to sort of start building up those layers. And as I build the layers, they'll tell me what my next steps are. And if you're joining me live, I'd love to hear from you. Say good morning. Let me know you're here. If you're watching the replay, just add a comment letting me know that you watched. And I'm just moving that color around the page a little bit. I want to get it in all the different places. Again, I'm working on both of these at the same time. I love the creaminess of oil pastels. There's something about them that just makes me feel like a kid when I'm working with them, and they make me pretty happy to play with. So it's definitely a great, red's not going to show, a great addition to your stash of art supplies. Just an inexpensive set of like Pentel oil pastels. So much of that kind of stuff is on sale right now. It's a great time to be looking for art supplies. And it's interesting to work on top of the black and just to notice, you know, what shows up, what isn't as bright. And I'm just focusing on this front piece of the envelope. You're not going to see as much of the rest of it once it has things stuffed inside of it. I don't need to paint the back because it's going to be glued down, so I'm just working on the open side of the envelope. Normally we think of this as the front side, but that's going to get adhered into my journal. So I'm making sure I also don't paint these together so they stick together. Oh, look at that orange on that black. Trying to vary my marks and use different marks and shapes. This is a great way to just play. And experiment. What kind of shapes do you like? What does your hand love to make? Sorry, I'm a little froggy this morning. I didn't get up quite as early as I wanted to this morning. I usually like to have a little extra time to wake up. But it was nice and warm and a little harder to get up this morning. Feeling like it needs like some spot of a little bit of green. I've got definitely a lot of little bits and pieces in here. You can tell my favorite colors that are kind of used up. That one's almost white. All right, let's try this green. No, I really need that limey green, but I'm not seeing a limey green in there right now. And I'm going to paint over this anyway, so really this is just building up layers. And the one thing I did not bring over here today was my brayer. So I may go and grab my brayer because I'm really having so much fun using a brayer to add some color. So bear with me as I go to the hunt around here for a minute, because I think it's over on the other side of my studio. All right, I'm back. I've been having fun with using just these little small brayers to put paint on the page. I think they add nice texture. And I'm looking for my white. Time to just continue to brighten this puppy up. I'm just going to put that paint right on there. And some of you may be saying, but wait, but what? You just covered up everything that you painted, and that's kind of the point of wanting to just really build up these layers. And again, I'm just working on top of some newsprint and cleaning off. Well, hello, screw. Look at that. Screw just came out of my brayer. I've never had that happen before. Let's see if I can get that back in there. All right. I have to take that up to my hubby and get him to work some screwdriver magic for me, or find me a screwdriver. Again, just moving stuff out of the way. This one has a little bit too much paint on it, so I'm going to come back in. Oh, and look how fun that is now. Just even smoothing that more and getting some of that undercolor really showing through. So fun to start to build up these layers. That's why I love any kind of old cards. All right, some seriously messy fun going on here. This is definitely in the messy middle. And so sometimes I just have to pause and kind of think about where am I going to go next. And I can come back and bring some of this color back a little bit. I'm just using the end of a paintbrush. All these little marks are just feeling kind of like festive fun, right? So when we're talking about lessons learned, right, or skills learned, there's a lot to celebrate. Even though some of the lessons were challenging and painful, some of them physically and emotionally painful, right? I learned them. And some of them I may have to learn again and again, right? But to be on that lifelong learning journey is always worth celebrating. Okay, definitely have some serious messiness going on here. And this is that point where sometimes we just look at a place. This is the process of learning as well, right? We're just learning what do we like, what works, what doesn't work. So sometimes you just have to sit with it for a minute and think about it. Let it dry just for a minute. and think about where to go next. Think about where to go next. So again, just continuing to brighten this up. I'm going to come back in and start to add maybe even more colors on top of this. Using my handy dandy catalyst wedge. And needing to remember that this piece is small, right? So it's not taking very much paint to cover these up this morning. And if I get too much, I can always just go back and blot some of that off on my paper. Ooh, and then get some of whatever's on my palette. So bring in some of that black back again. And I've mentioned before in this series that I love to build up transparent layers so that I'm not losing things that are underneath. I've got a big glob of them there. All right, let's move that up there. Okay, it does not want to come off. I just want to get some of that off there. Making a big old mess today. Okay, but I'm liking where we're going. Liking where I'm going. So maybe some green. You know, one of the lessons that I always learn and relearn is how healing it is for me to be in nature. And so I think those colors of nature, the blues and the greens, pardon me, tend to definitely appear in my art. Again, grungy mess, right? Just a big, happy, grungy mess. And what I'm noticing is this is not having anything to do yet with my background page. So I'm going to want to figure out ways to tie these together. And one of the stencils that I pulled to play with was a fancy tree stencil that I found that I love. Excuse me. I am gonna mute myself for just a minute. Again, apologies for the froggy throat. This is Raw, coming to you live, painted in my PJs. So I'm going to bring some of this red back through my stencil. So I've got just a little makeup sponge. There was almost like there was a whole forest of learning that happened this year. Loving that little forest there. So let's make sure that we repeat the colors and the patterns and the texture. Probably going to want to bring some of these colors over onto my main page as well, but I think for today I'm just going to stay focused here on these two little pieces. And some days I can sit down and easily do a spread in an hour, and sometimes it's just about, I just need to put some color on paper, and I don't have a direction that I'm going. I don't have any need to finish anything. I'm just really in the sort of joy and play of where am I going with this, and How can I just take those mindful moments, using up some of that blue paint there with my broken brayer, but how can I use just some mindful moments to ground and connect? So this was something that I would say I've been learning over the last couple of years, is how to use art as mindful meditation. How to use art as mindful meditation, and how art really supports me, and that it doesn't have to be these long hours and hours of playtime. It's great when I get that. And then sometimes all I have is 15 minutes to just sit down and put some color on the page. Just to sit down and put some color on the page. So I'm working on this open as a spread, but when I go to tuck it in my envelope, everything is still very wet. I'm only going to see one side of it, so I'm mindful of that, and yet I'm creating this symmetry, right? Creating this symmetry between all the different parts of the page, and even just adding this little bit of blue to the page, or the little bit of red to the page. It's all starting to come together. I'm going to let this crackle paste dry for the rest of the day today before I add paint. So I'm just going to work on these two pieces. So I'm just kind of noticing, right? Like I'm working on them as a whole, but there's going to be some change. And now I'm wanting to bring some of that black back. And I've got just a piece of old sequin waste, which makes really lovely circles. I'm going to just cut the end off that makeup sponge. Once you've used them, they tend to, when they dry, they get really hard. And so if you just cut the ends off, you can continue to use them. But I want to bring back a little bit of that black. I'm definitely going to want to bring back some more white. And this is how I tend to just find my way, right? So all I know is that I'm creating this card and this envelope, and they're going to go in my journal. And that was the only information that I had when I started. And it's interesting because how I was feeling when I started, that one of the biggest lessons that I learned this year was really learning to honor my grief and make time and space for grief. And how healing it is to give ourselves permission to truly grieve. And I did a lot of grieving on the page. I did grieving in community. My husband and I are talking about writing a book together, and we were having this interesting conversation yesterday about feelings and emotions and comfort, and how sometimes the way through healing of any kind or growth is discomfort, right? Discomfort. And we are not a culture here in this country that's very good at being uncomfortable. I think we're usually really good at finding 1,000,001 ways to numb out. Just seeing if I can find some places where I can bring some of that oil pastels back. We're really good at numbing out. We're really good at avoidance and walking away from our emotions. My friend, and I'll tell you more about the book as it becomes more clear and we go along, but it's going to be a book about how to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And so what I noticed when I was writing this morning was just talking about the grief and the lessons learned from that, right? It's uncomfortable. It's vulnerable to talk about that. And my friend Andrea Chevalou and I run a program called The Creative Stretch. We're in season 3 of The Creative Stretch. You can find it at creativestretch.teachable.com. And we've interviewed 12 artists about 36 different emotions. And it's been fascinating to really go through and look at how do we actually feel and how do we really start to name our emotions, right? To name our emotions, that there's such a beautiful, broad perspective of emotions, and yet most of the time we're sort of clueless how to name those, right? And so we've been exploring and connecting with all these just different emotions, and grief is one of them. I was working on a page yesterday in my Creative Stress Journal that was all about disappointment and unmet expectations, and how unmet expectations just create a lot of havoc. And the more that we can learn to manage our own expectations, the better off we are, the better off we are. But it made me think about all that just starting on this page. So these are the thoughts that are going through my head as I'm creating these pages. Is really, most of my learning was emotional learning this year. And at the end of the year, I can reflect back and look at how amazing the opportunities have been around what I've learned. And when you're in the thick of it, it's hard, right? When you're in the thick of it, it's challenging to see any of that. These guys may be too big, but they're speaking to me. So let's just see if we can. I could stencil for days, right? Like just building up again these crazy, messy pages brings me a lot of joy and gets me into what I call deep play. There's no destination here, there's only experimentation. And I think that's a huge thing that we can learn, is how do we just be in the energy of deep play and experimentation. I think some yellow. I love finger painting. Just needs a little more pop of color, right? I think I started with black. It gives it that really sort of moody feel underneath. All by itself creates a really different effect than when we start with white gesso. So starting a page with black gesso can create some cool effects. Bring in some of this yellow, maybe calm some of these areas down. So these are looking really fun, but also very busy, right? Very busy. So I'm feeling like it's time to just settle down here a little bit, especially on what's going to end up being that front cover. And every once in a while, I'm just sort of folding that up so I can get a perspective on what it's going to look like. What is that going to look like? Carefully tucking it into my envelope. So they match, that's for sure. They do not match my red page over there yet, but they will eventually. Probably have to finish that up this evening, or if I get a break in my workday. But it's so important to me to have these morning creative times where I'm just down here by myself in the quiet with you. Looks like I'm by myself today. I don't think I have anyone watching me live today. So if you are here, say hi. It's always nice to know that people are watching. And what I noticed when I closed the folder is that I wasn't seeing any of that red. So I'm going to come back and with my trees. And just add some of the edges of the branches. So that when it is closed, I'm seeing a little bit of the branches up there. I'm liking that. I think the other thing that I've learned, and this was something that we talked about with one of the artists in the creative stretch, is to let go of judgment and comparison. I think the word was comparison. And it's been attributed to a few different people, I think mostly to Maya Angelou, that comparison is the thief of joy. And it's so true. When we're in comparison, we really can't see our own genius, right? We can't see our own genius. And so I've really worked this year on just letting go of any judgment I have about my art and really enjoying just being in the playfulness of it. And I'm looking at this going, I think I want the question, because I want to be able to remember what the prompt was on the page. So I'm just going to write that down here. Oh, that's an 05. That one may be too fine. Let's try this one. It's going to have to be black, I think. That's not showing up on there like I wanted it to. So again, experimentation and play. Try it, it doesn't work. Everything is paint overable. Everything is paint overable. It may be too wet to get. So you can see I'm trying things, they're working, they're not working, so I just keep trying till I find the thing that works. And I think my paint may be a little too wet. And it's sort of scraping back to what was underneath. So that might need a label on it later. You can't even see it, but I've sort of scratched in there. What did I learn in 2022? What did I learn in 2022? So I'm loving the envelope. I think the envelope is pretty much ready to go. It feels fun, it feels playful. I'm kind of digging the way it's looking. Over here on the page, this is going to get painted over once this crackle paste dries. I'll bring back some more of these other colors and make the background match, but I'm kind of liking where it's going. So this will get taped in with some double stick tape probably a little bit later. I also kind of unintentionally picked colors that match my left-hand page, right? I wasn't necessarily even thinking about this page or looking at it, but I chose very similar colors. I think these are kind of the moody colors. When you start to bring in those reds and blues and blacks, you get some of that moodiness. And this page was, what am I releasing? What am I releasing at the end of this year? All right, so I'm going to come back over here. And I wanted to put an image of a person on here, and she's sort of looking off, being reflective. And I have a couple of different things that I could do, but I'm going to glue her down with some matte medium and then paint over the top of her to make her my own. It's a great way to get started painting faces without having to, and I'm just going to make sure, without having to draw faces. I love drawing faces as well, but sometimes I love having just a starting place, right? I love having a starting place. And she's looking a little sad and reflective, and that's often how we feel when we're looking back over the year, is that deep reflection, right? So I teach that there's 6 pillars of a radiant life. I've shared 2 of them with you today. Deep play and deep reflection are part of our creative journey, part of our creative journey. So I'm going to get my matte medium. And this is where, you know, I know my background is too dark and it's going to take a lot of lightening up. But first we're going to get this. So again, don't use paint brushes with matte medium unless you have some old ones or an inexpensive chip brush. It's really hard to get all that gluey, sticky out of there. So I prefer to use either my catalyst wedge or a palette knife. And I'm putting matte medium underneath and on top. I want to create a nice smooth surface that I'm going to paint right over the top of, and the matte medium creates a really nice surface for painting on top of. Take my catalyst wedge, again, a hotel key card, Starbucks card. I think even I have one of my husband's old driver's licenses. Anything like that makes a great tool. All right, so I'm really noticing with this figure that where the lights and darks are, where the lights and darks. So we've got a lot of light shining on this side of her face and more darks this side of her neck, right? So I'm going to kind of repeat that, but what I know is I'm going to want to continue her shoulders here and probably give her some flowy hair and just really start to come in and make her my own. I'm probably going to white out some of the background to kind of calm that background down as well, to really make her stand out. And she's got, you know, kind of pinky, peachy skin here. I've got my white, I've got my red. And I'm gonna probably want some poking around in my paints here. I love a little yellow ochre, can be great for starting with skin tone. So I'm gonna spend a few minutes just mixing some paints here. For the most part of my background, I was using paint right out of the tube. Throughout this journal, I've been really focused on primary colors, and I did that super intuitively without a lot of intention. And a lot of artists talk about using a particular palette for a journal and sort of sticking with that palette. And it's an interesting way to approach a journal. I don't know that I've ever done that on purpose. And this time I've done it, but I've done it, it's like one of those happy accidents, right? One of those happy accidents. So I've got a few skin tony colors going here. So I'm going to come in with a pretty small brush. And I'm going to start in some of these darker areas, just laying in some color. And I'm not worried about making this super realistic. And we've got our lighter tones here. And again, my intention here is just to really paint right over her and make her completely my own. Using a photograph that I printed off of Unsplash. which is a great resource. I think that's all going to be hair over there. And so there's not going to be a lot of detail down here, but I do want it to look more like she's sort of filling that page. So I'm turning her into quite an abstract image here. Get some of that color in that eye. And again, just remembering, where are those highlights? If you forget and you need reminders, it can be helpful to have 2 printouts of the image. Going to need to switch over to definitely a smaller brush here. I'm wondering if this yellow ochre, nope, not going to like that for the hair. Kind of liking her beautiful brown hair, but since I've been working with a lot of black today, I may just come in with some black for the hair. And again, I'll add more variation and highlights. Again, this is a great way to practice painting people and learning to just notice where the shadows are, where the highlights are. That hair is really black, maybe blacker than I want, but it's a good start, right? It's a good start. I'm getting a lot more gray in my hair these days. So maybe I'm going to show some of that wisdom of what I've learned, a little more maturity here. Nice red lips. Adding a little bit of black to some of those flesh tones, darken those up. Bring her eyebrows back. She's got really dark eyes in here as well. So again, just very abstract, moody. I like where it's going. I definitely want to blend some of this together a little bit. Getting a quick text from my husband here, so forgive me for just a second. And working in this small space, having some really tiny brushes is really helpful. Again, that adding paint, removing paint. All of a sudden her nose got really big. I can wipe some of that away. And she's feeling definitely just a little messy here. And I'm being impatient. I should have let those, the black of her hair dry there a little bit. And her nose. All right, I'm going to hit this with a dryer. Having a hair dryer or a craft dryer is super helpful, right? Super helpful to just be in that energy of keeping things going, right? Like I tend to get impatient, as you're seeing, and I just want to keep working. But then if I'm too impatient, then I have things that start mixing together where I don't want them to mix together. So just getting some of my colors mixed up again here. She has this nice highlight on her nose here and her forehead. And her neckline. My paints on my palette over here are drying almost faster than I can work with them. I'm going to start to smooth some of this out. And now I'm noticing, right, her face is kind of all the same color here. So I'm going to want to just continue to play with bringing those different areas together, going back and forth, adding the highlights. It's one of my challenges is adding highlights. I always think, oh, it's too white, it's too dramatic. So what if I just let go of that fear and just come in and let those lights, right, be what they need to be. And just a little bit more of this cheekbone here, down the side of the nose. If I just allow myself to be in the messy play, I actually like that effect more, right? Than if I'm trying to be perfect or copy it exactly like it was. So I have this moody, reflective portrait here that I'm pretty happy with. And I'm thinking I want to do something around her eye here. Or maybe I don't, right? So there's that, maybe I just leave it as it is. I'm kind of feeling like I want to just have a little fun with her hair and add some color and just continue to be curious with her, right? This is that reflective, looking back, what am I noticing? I kind of like where she's going. It's a good beginning. I'm noticing her eyebrows need a little touch up, and it doesn't all have to be paint. So I'm going to come in here and like sharpen up some of these blacks in here. Use all the tools at your disposal, right? Use all the tools at your disposal. I'm thinking I want her to actually have an eye in there. Just adding that one little change, right? By giving her an eye, just starts to make her a little more real. Where's my, just one tiny little, maybe touch of green. Just using the end of my paintbrush. All right, I'm loving where this is going. It's going to be time to let it rest here for a while before I decide where I want to go next. Excuse me, I can tell when I've gotten to that stage of it's time to walk away and not just messing with it, because when I mess with it, I mess it up. So I can feel intuitively that I'm at the place where I need to step away. I need to let this background get dry. I need to attach my envelope. And she's eventually going to sit here in this envelope, sort of peeking out at me. Now I'm looking at her and going, is that true? I really like her. I'm not sure. Right? So maybe this envelope is going to get saved for something else. And she's going to go right here on the page with this letter to myself about what I learned right here on the inside of the page. This is what I mean by working intuitively, not knowing exactly where I'm going, just being patient. She needs her neck back a little bit here, so probably going to play with that a little bit. Yeah, so she doesn't feel quite done, but it definitely feels like I need to just step away a little bit and reflect on where I want to go next and write that letter about what I learned. And I have a couple of choices here because, I really love this back piece. What if I don't want to lose all of that? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pull that off of there and save it for something else. And then once I finish this page, I will hinge her in either this way or actually maybe that way so I can see what's underneath. I'm still sort of amazed at how I ended up unintentionally choosing very similar colors for these two pages. Kind of crazy, and it's all perfect. But I think for now, I'm going to let her rest. And when I come back tomorrow, I will show you the finished page as well. Gotta let that crackle paste dry. I love that I can still see some of my handwriting on the background. but I'm pretty happy with how she turned out. Just painting right over the top of that magazine image. And I might come in and work some more on the background, but for now, I did a lot of learning this morning. I did a lot of reflecting on what I learned. Right now I'm learning to pause and not just keep going, but to step away from it and come back and look again later with fresh eyes. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm Dr. Minette, and this is Painting in Your PJs. And our theme today was, what did I learn in 2022? Have a beautiful and amazing rest of your day. Thanks for joining.